Hi, everyone, and welcome to the lineup. Today is June the 6th, 2024. I'm Barry Stagner. Very glad to have you joining with us this evening. And as always, we've got a group of stories from all over the world covering the events that relate to Bible prophecy. And of course, we need to spend some time on Israel, but there are a lot of other elements of the prophetic wheel, so to speak, spokes on the wheel, if you will, that are happening right now. And we'll cover some of those as well. So let's just jump in. And by the way, thanks for all the comments last week regarding the prayer needs. And please continue to keep those going for Pastor Steve Yohn and the sweet little Elena in our church. You can add my sister's name to the list. She's fighting pancreatic cancer, and God has been touching her greatly. So we need to be a praying people. I think that's so critically important for all of us to remember that God hears our cries. And we need to be praying for one another, lifting each other up. And thank you again for just so many wonderful responses to the request last week. And it's quite stunning, actually, the amount of things going on. We just seems like every day something pops up. Somebody's going through something just horrific, and we need to uh, pull together and to be, as we are called in Scripture, lovers of one another and thus identifiable as the disciples of Christ. So thank you again for those prayers. Well, let's jump in. Our first story comes from the Jewish News Syndicate. And Lieberman says Iran and its proxies will stage an all out attack, I should say, within 2 years. Sorry about that war attack. The state of Israel must understand that Iran is planning an all out attack within 2 years of the entire axis of evil against the state of Israel, Avigdor Lieberman, chairman of the Yisrael Beitenu party, warned on Monday. And the coordinated and synchronized attack would emanate from Iran and its proxies: Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Shiite militias operating in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen, the former defense minister told 103 FM radio host Ben Caspit and Aryeh Eldon. I don't get the impression that the decision makers at both the political and military levels understand this and have internalized it, but they are preparing for it, Lieberman said. Everything we see right now from Hezbollah is a promo. They're trying to learn our defense system, the reactions of our anti-aircraft, the nature and speed of the reaction. This is a learning process, he said. Lieberman based his prediction on the time it would take Iran to complete the military aspects of its nuclear program. They have already passed from the stage of enriching the uranium to the deployment of the military part. The military part will take them 2 years, he said. Iran wants to have an umbrella of nuclear weapons, not just the possession of enriched uranium, he explained. The erosion of Israeli deterrence brought them to the conclusion that they can sprint towards the nuclear weapons, Lieberman said, referring to Israel's failures on October 7th and its muted counterattack on the Iranian aerial assault on the Jewish state in April. Lieberman sharply criticized Israel's policy of containment, where it attempts to manage aggression rather than decisively defeating it. And boy, we hear exactly the opposite from the international community. The fact that we don't know how to defeat a terrorist organization like Hamas for 8 months requires examination, he said. It can't be that for 6 days a small country with a much smaller population, with equipment and weapons not as advanced as compared to what we have today, fought on 3 fronts against 3 countries, he said, referring to the 1967 Six-Day War. Now, we do not know how to fight against 2 terrorist organizations at the same time, he went on to say. Now, this is an interesting element, and it reminds us of something I think that maybe we've had our attention drawn away from because of so much activity within the boundaries of Syria, where we've got a military presence of Turkey, Russia, and the Persians or the Iranians, and thus a lot of talk about the invasion from the north in the Ezekiel war scenario. But we have to remember that there are 2 nations on the northern border of Israel, and the other being Lebanon. And while the Lebanese government may not be in full support of the actions of Hezbollah, Hezbollah is definitely running the show, and they are definitely an arm of Iran or the Persians who seek the destruction, I should say again, the Persian regime who seeks the destruction of the nation of Israel. So, keep an eye on this. And this is one of the things that I think we all need to keep in mind, that, this attack that's going to happen on Israel from the north, can come from both directions. It can come from Syria. It can also come from the Lebanese side of the Israeli northern border. So let's just kind of keep an eye on that. And again, we are such a privileged people in kind of a positive and negative way, in that, like Daniel 12:4 said, the visions that he was given were for the appointed time. I mean, they were coming and going to be revealed in the future. And there was a generation that would understand them more clearly, even the things that Daniel was told to write down himself, the visions he received. And I believe we are living in that generation where, we can see things a lot more clearly than previous generations. And watching these things develop, seeing for the first time this coalition of nations gathered together, at least unified in cause and purpose, whether that be economic or ideologic, is really irrelevant, but they are working together on the northern border of Israel. And by proxy, the Iranians have a presence there through Hezbollah on the the northwestern side of the nation of Israel. Israel, no question, has taken center stage on world news. We've got several stories that remind us of Zechariah 12:3 and the things that we need to keep in mind in these last days. And yes, we are in perilous times. Times are difficult, and things that we see happening around us are just hard to believe. It really is just amazing to see the things that are happening in our world, happening right before our eyes in such a short span of time. But let me remind you that, when the book of Revelation starts, Revelation chapter 1, verse 1, John is told he was going to be shown things that happen shortly. And that doesn't mean soon. That Greek word translated as shortly into English means in quick succession. In other words, once they start, they're going to fire off rapid fire. And really, this is what we're seeing. I mean, just think about the world 10, 15 years ago. It was still a mess, but it wasn't the mess like we have today. And we are seeing so many things advance rapidly, kind of like birth pangs with a pregnant woman, as Jesus mentioned in Matthew 24:3-8. And we're watching these things get more intense and more frequent as every tick of the clock passes. So Reuters also reports that Israel believes more than a third of the hostages not yet returned are actually dead, and a tragic story indeed. Israel believes more than a third of the remaining Gaza hostages are actually dead. A government tally showed Tuesday as the U.S. sought to advance their recovery under a proposal to wind down the war with Hamas. Of about 250 people dragged into the Gaza Strip by Hamas-led Palestinian gunmen during the October 7th cross-border rampage that sparked the war, scores were freed in a November truce, while others have been recovered dead or alive by Israeli troops. The government tally said 120 remain in captivity, 43 of whom have been declared dead in absentia by Israeli officials based on various sources of information, including intelligence tip-offs, CCTV, or bystander videos and forensic analysis. Some officials have privately said that the number of dead could be much higher. And Hamas, which threatened at the outset of the war to execute hostages in reprisal for Israeli airstrikes, has since said such attacks caused hostages' deaths. Israel has not ruled that out in all cases, but said that some recovered hostage bodies showed signs of execution. 4 more hostages were added to Israel's list of fatalities on Monday. Joe Biden said on Friday, with an Israeli proposal to wind down the war under which some hostages would go free during a preliminary ceasefire, but mediated efforts to clinch that deal have been bogged down as Israel insists on destroying Hamas terrorists, while the Hamas terror group demands a guaranteed end to the war and withdrawal of all invasion forces to save its terrorists from accountability. Now, kind of a parallel story. In the post-millennial, there's an article, the headline reads, "Families of hostages held captive by Hamas asked Biden to stop interfering on behalf of the terrorists." And according to a statement posted by the Tikva Forum, which brings together the families of abductees, works with the goal of assisting the speedy release of all the abductees, down to the last of them, out of national responsibility and trust in the resilience of the State of Israel and the IDF. The Biden administration's continued pressure on the Israeli government's decision-making during this existential war is unacceptable. The group posted on X the outline proposed by Biden, ostensibly on behalf of the Israeli government, is a proposal that endangers the future of the state of Israel. We respectfully ask the president to trust our experience and expertise on the Middle East. Let me pause there for a moment. This has been one of the great catastrophes of not just this administration, but others as well. And that is not understanding how things operate in the Middle East. And listen, you cannot have a Western mentality in Middle Eastern dealings. And this is what has been problematic in places like Afghanistan and Iran and other situations in the Middle East where, you know, the ideologues, so to speak, do not look at life and value life the way we do. They look at death, and especially in battle, we're talking about Islamic thinking. They look at death as an assurance of going to paradise. And therefore, there's no harm, there's no sorrow in death. And we've seen even Hamas leaders lose relatives to, the Israeli counterstrikes and just celebrating this and being thankful that their son or daughter or nephew or uncle or whatever was counted worthy to die for the cause. So the thinking is just so backwards so many times, and I think this is what this Tikva group is saying and pleading with the president: just stay out of it. You don't get it. And again, this has long been the case. And the group continued: Hamas must be completely destroyed, and every sign of weakness will empower it to commit the next massacre. And there's more truth. That's exactly how they view things. That's the way they think. There's no diplomacy as all these groups around the world are trying to force into this scene. It's about really, in the end, it's setting up the empire, if you will, the caliphate, the global caliphate of Islam to many of those involved. And the abductees will only be returned if Hamas is totally dismantled and begs for help. If Gazans are allowed to return to the northern Gaza Strip before the release of all the hostages, Israel will lose a key form of pressure, one that can cost our hostages lives. Please, Honorable POTUS, respect the decisions made by Israel's elected leadership and stand by us as a true ally in this difficult time, the group concluded. Now, this brings about another point. We live in an age where basically decisions are financed around the world. They're bought and sold. And, because of financial pressures and threats of removing, any type of military hardware provision from the United States to the nation of Israel to defend themselves, it's basically strong arming, blackmailing, if you will, people into making decisions that are against the best for the citizenry of their country. And certainly Israel is in that position. Many other countries have been in that position as well. But, one thing we have to remember is that these are God's people, and He has brought them back into the land for His name's sake and His glory. And I bring this up a lot because it needs to be said. Ezekiel 36 establishes the fact that Israel has to exist in the last days, and it is not just a political entity. It's not just another state or country among many in the world. It is God bringing His people back, because when they were not in their national homeland, given to them by unconditional and everlasting covenant, His name was being profaned. He told them in Ezekiel 36, 21 and 22, I'm not doing this for your sake. I'm doing it for my name's sake and the glory of His great name. So, obviously, and I think a lot of us evangelical Christians get, fingers pointed at us for, blindly supporting Israel. Nobody blindly supports Israel. But what we do support is their right to exist, and we see it as a huge prophetic significance. And I believe that what Jesus said in the Olivet Discourse about the generation that sees the fig tree bud once again, and the fig tree is well established in the Old Testament as an idiom for the nation of Israel. And when the nation again is tender, the branch is tender, and it puts forth leaves, that's the opening stage of actually the harvest of the figs, then know that the end is near. And that generation that sees the birth of the nation, is not going to pass away until all things take place. So again, this is part of why I think there's so much talk about the nation of Israel, and why the enemy has infiltrated so much teaching today, saying the church has replaced Israel. modern Israel is not biblical Israel, and all those other ridiculous things that are just flat out heretical. The modern nation of Israel has been proven time and again in its very brief history to be under the protective hand of God. We'll talk a little bit about, we read a little bit of, a few moments ago about the 6 Day War and how they were outgunned and outmanned and invaded by massive armies, and yet they were victorious. And they will be victorious in this as well. One, because, the prophet Amos said in 9:15 that when they're brought back into the land, they will not be uprooted again. So we know that that's the reality, and nothing can change it. Aren't you glad we serve a God who is omnipotent? Remember, that means all powerful. And what he says goes, and what he says he's going to do, no one can stop him. He has no counselors, he has no equal, he has no evil equal on on the counter side of things in the name of Satan or any other demonic being. But the God is on the throne, and he is bringing things to a conclusion as we know them. Now, we do know that after the tribulation, there's going to be a time that the world has never enjoyed, and that is direct rule of the King of Kings and Lord of Lords as he sits on the throne of human government, described in Scripture as David's throne, and rules and reigns in righteousness for 1,000 years. Can you imagine such a time where there's no unfairness, there's no crooked judges, there's no crooked lawyers, there's no crooked politicians, there's no crooked anything, because the one who is in charge is the perfect King of Kings and Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ the righteous. And by the way, we'll be ruling and reigning with him at that time. I've heard people say, kind of tongue in cheek, that, I hope the Lord will assign me someplace like Kauai or another beautiful place, or Tahiti or something to rule over. But I think one thing we need to remember is that what we can deem from Isaiah and other places in Scripture, that the whole world's going to look like that. Going to return to, I use the phrase, an Eden-like condition. And we're going to rule and reign over this beautiful earth that is nearly destroyed, but ultimately it will be completely destroyed, and a new heavens and a new earth will be made instantaneously by the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and we will be with him in the New Jerusalem forever and ever and ever. You could say amen to that. Now, here's an interesting flashpoint story. Times of Israel says Ben Gvir boasts of letting Jews pray on the Temple Mount. And Netanyahu responds and says, the status quo is unchanged. Far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir said Wednesday evening that as far as he is concerned, Jewish prayer is now allowed on the Temple Mount, prompting a quick rebuff by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office, which released a terse statement insisting that the status quo at the Flashpoint, Jerusalem Holy Site, has not changed and will not change. On June the 7th, 1967, there was a declaration made over the radio that the Temple Mount is in our hands. And why it was handed back continues, at least in my mind, to be a mystery, but God's timing is perfect. And he was well aware of what was going to happen, that they would hand it over because it is such a hot button spot, hand it back over to the control, as it is now, of the Jordanians, and they would basically oversee the Temple Mount, even though it's completely within the national boundaries of Israel. In what would constitute a breach of the longstanding unwritten arrangement on the Temple Mount, the ultra-nationalist minister, who is in charge of the Israeli police, which is responsible for security at the site, told Radio Gali Israel that his policy was to allow Jewish prayer in the compound. I am also happy that Jews went up to the Temple Mount and prayed there today. There's news reports of some 1,600 Jews on Jerusalem Day ascended up to the Temple Mount, said the minister, who spent part of the day taking part in the annual Jerusalem Day flag march through the Muslim quarter of the capital's old city. It is very important, and my policy is very clear on this matter. Jews can be anywhere in Jerusalem and pray anywhere. Now, in the past, on trips to the Temple Mount and visiting Israel, we've been told in no uncertain terms, do not stand in a circle, do not take up a posture of prayer, don't bow your heads, keep your heads lifted up. And this is what's being told to Christians, by the way. And don't show any sign, no Bible reading, Nothing like that on the Temple Mount. And again, I think it's worthy of mention that, in the Quran, there's no mention of the city of Jerusalem, and certainly not the Temple Mount there. As a matter of fact, what the Quran does say is that the people of Moses are the ones who have the right to the Holy Land and everything that is within its boundaries. But, the reality is we're watching these things unfold in ways and levels that have never been seen before, never experienced during the church age. And this is one of the things I get a lot of emails and a lot of comments on social media about the church going through the tribulation. I just had somebody kind of rebuked me publicly in line at the grocery store about why I believe in the rapture of the church. The guy had asked me what I do for a living, and I told him the first thing he said was, "Do you believe in the rapture?" I said, "Sure do." He said, "Why? It's not in the Bible." And this is the attitude of a lot of people. But, in looking at the things that we see in Scripture, we have to remember that, the tribulation period, the great and terrible day of the Lord, is the 70th week of Daniel. The church wasn't here for any of the first 69 weeks. So why would we be here for the 70th? We will not be here. And there's a host of other reasons why, Revelation 3:10 being one of them, that will be taken from the time that's going to test men on the whole, the face of the whole earth, and the fact that we're not appointed to wrath, and a host of other things. So listen, as we watch these things develop, let's not get overwhelmed with sadness or even fear, and just recognize that there's coming a moment and a twinkling of an eye experience for us as Christians. I say that every week because we need to hear it every week. And if it didn't happen last week, and it didn't, then that means this week is an even better candidate. So let's keep our eyes lifted up. And asked during the radio interview, back to the article, whether prayers were not being conducted only informally. In a whisper, Ben Gvir said, "No, no, no, no. No one whispered. Jews prayed on the Temple Mount." That's the ministerial position, and Jews pray on the Temple Mount, and that's a good thing. The Temple Mount, the article says, in Jerusalem's old city, is the holiest place in Judaism, as the site of the two biblical temples. Known to Muslims as Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary, it's also home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest site in Islam. And Hebrew media reported that some 1,600 Jewish pilgrims entered the Temple Mount on Wednesday, as we mentioned a moment ago, including one activist who wore tefillin, or phylacteries, while walking around the site, an act of worship that has long been forbidden. And the vague status quo governing the compound allows Muslims to pray and enter with few restrictions, while non-Muslims, including Jews, can visit only in limited time slots via a single gate, with visibly religious Jews only allowed to walk on a predetermined route, closely accompanied by police. The Jews are not officially allowed to pray, and police have increasingly tolerated limited prayer. Many Palestinians and Muslims reject the very notion that the Temple Mount is holy to the Jews, having accused Israel and Zionists for around a century of plotting to destroy the mosque and replace it with a Jewish temple. You mean like the two that are, the remains are underground, the temple right now, all the way back to Solomon's temple, where you see the retaining wall stones, just massive stones deep underneath the Temple Mount. And the Temple Mount has been the scene of frequent clashes between Palestinian protesters and the Israeli security forces, and tensions at the disputed compound have fueled past rounds of violence. And responding to Ben Gvir's comments, member Knesset Walid Awashala of the Islamist Ra'am Party tweeted that by calling to undermine the status quo, the national security minister was doing everything he can to set Jerusalem and the entire country on fire, stating that every additional day he spends as a minister responsible for the police and law enforcement is a clear and tangible danger to all of us, Awashala asserted, and that it was not enough for Netanyahu to release a statement contradicting Ben Gvir. It is time to fire him, he said. Well, again, this just underscores what a hot button issue this is. And the Temple Mount is indeed the flashpoint. And, we've talked about over the years the fact that, things are going to like a funnel, uh, beginning with the 8,800 square miles known as the nation of Israel. And then the attention is going to be drawn down to the city of Jerusalem, as we're seeing happening and has been happening right now to that 70 square miles. And then finally, there's going to be 35 acres. That is the actual fuse that lights the powder keg, I believe, of the Middle East. And this is necessary to be fulfilled, I think, prophetically, in order for that temple, that third temple that the Bible implies is going to be rebuilt and has to be rebuilt, for the abomination of desolation to take place, committed at the midpoint of the tribulation by the Antichrist. So, once again, just watching all of these things reminds us of the lateness of the hour. And I hope that as we talk each week, and as I say on Sundays, week after week at the church, if you happen to watch any of the messages there, we need to have a desperation for the lost and perishing around us. So I want to encourage you. I know a lot of times we talk to people over and over and over, and people get angry with us, or people reject the gospel of Christ. But their souls are at stake. And one thing I think we need to remember, especially as Christians, when we think about the rapture, we think of it in positive terms. But there's a lot of negatives with the rapture of the church for those who remain on the earth, because some of the things that have been spoken of kind of lightly and even somewhat jokingly are going to be realities. Planes are going to crash. There will be pilotless planes. There will be captainless ships. There will be driverless cars. And people all over the world are going to die at the moment of the rapture because of these things. So, for those that we're hoping will see the light during the rapture, or after the rapture, I should say, and we don't know that they're going to have that opportunity. So let's be bold and take that step and share Christ that one more time. You just don't know. And I've shared this with many people over the years, who've been praying for a spouse, praying for a child. And we need to remember that you don't have to see progress for God to be moving. He moves in the unseen realm. We never know what he's doing with people in the wee hours of the evening when thoughts are creeping in, discouragement or despair, or just the wondering, well, what if? And God is always at work. And aren't you glad he never slumbers nor sleeps? He who watches Israel watches over us as well, because there is only one Savior then. He is the Holy One of Israel, and he is Christ the Lord. Reuters says in a blow to the Biden plan, Hamas leader demands full end to Gaza war. The leader of Hamas said on Wednesday the group would demand a permanent end to the war in Gaza and Israeli withdrawal as a part of a ceasefire plan, dealing an apparent blow to a truce proposal touted last week by U.S. President Joe Biden. Israel, meanwhile, said there will be no halt to fighting during ceasefire talks and launched a new assault on a central section of the Gaza Strip near the last city yet to be stormed by its tanks. The remarks by Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh appeared to deliver the Palestinian militant group's reply to the proposal that Biden unveiled last week. Washington has said it was waiting to hear an answer from Hamas to what Biden described as an Israeli initiative, and we know that it was not. The movement and factions of the resistance will deal seriously and positively with any agreement that is based on a comprehensive ending of the aggression and the complete withdrawal and prisoner swap, Haniyeh said. And we know how a Palestinian prisoner swap goes. We'll give you one Jew for 1,000 Palestinians, and that's how these things normally go. And asked whether Haniyeh's remarks accounted to the group's reply to Biden, a senior Hamas official replied to a text message from Reuters with a thumbs up emoji. Washington is still pressing hard to reach an agreement. CIA Director William Burns met senior officials from mediators from Qatar and Egypt on Wednesday in Doha to discuss the ceasefire proposal. Since a brief week-long truce in November, all attempts to arrange a ceasefire have failed, with Hamas insisting on its demand for a permanent end to the conflict, while Israel says it is prepared to discuss only temporary pauses until the militant group is defeated. And Biden has repeatedly declared that ceasefires were close over the past several months, only for no truce to materialize. And notably, in February, Biden said Israel had agreed to a ceasefire by the start of Ramadan on March 10th, a deadline which passed with military operations in full swing. But last week's announcements came with far greater fanfare from the White House, and at a time when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is under mounting domestic political pressure to chart a path to end the 8-month-old war and negotiate the release of Israeli hostages held by Hamas. I know many of you follow Amir on Telegram, and he's made mention of how the U.S. administration has been stirring the pot with the Israeli population, trying to get rid of Netanyahu. We know there was no love lost when Joe Biden was the assistant to someone who had a very terse relationship with the prime minister of Israel, and also sought to see him removed from office and stirring the pot in the same way that we're now seeing with Biden. So, again, keeping our eyes on Israel, recognizing that they have taken center stage, things are wrapping up, Jesus is coming soon. And again, I have no hesitation in saying that. And, I've said in time past, if the Lord doesn't come soon, and we don't know the day or the hour, and, but we do know what Jesus said during the Olivet Discourse. He said, it's going to be like it was in the days of Noah. The earth was filled with violence. We can check that box. Thoughts and intents of man's heart was only evil continually. We're going to check that box with our next story. But I think we all recognize that. Lawlessness is going to abound. We can check that box. The love of many is going to grow cold. We can check that box. All these things have happened that are in relation to at least a broad proximity to the removal of the church and the ensuing tribulation that follows. Well, here we are in the great state of California, and it's hard to be in California right now. I have to admit, we love our beautiful state. We don't live too far from the beach, and just minutes away, quite literally. We get the sea breeze every afternoon, smell the ocean. A lot of evenings when people are having the fire pits down on the water, we can smell the fires from the people who are sitting around a fire ring, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows and all those things that so frequently happen here. And yet our state has become just a cesspool in the realm of politics. And Fox News reports, and this story is somewhat sickening, Governor Newsom proposes defunding police, prisons, and public safety as California faces massive deficit. Governor Gavin Newsom, there's another recall going on right now, by the way, a recall effort, I should say. If your church isn't in California and isn't on board with this, you need to get somebody up and running and get these signed, get these petitions signed, because this guy's dangerous. Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat from California, proposed slashing budgets regarding public safety, such as prisons and law enforcement, as the state simultaneously grapples with a crippling deficit and doubles down on climate goals related to equity. The California Democrats' proposed budget, released in May, notes that difficult decisions are necessary to address the estimated $27.6 billion deficit, which is projected to continue for years to come. It includes a $97 million cut to trial court operations, $10 million to the Department of Justice's Division of Law Enforcement, and more than $80 million to the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Now, you know what's going to happen when they cut $80 million from the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. They're going to lay off prison guards, and in order to accommodate the lesser number of guards, they're going to release prisoners. I mean, this is exactly the pattern that we would expect to see. The budget proposes numerous ways to make government more efficient and reduce costs for taxpayers, including cuts on inmate spending. Since Governor Newsom took office in 2019, the state has made record investments in law enforcement, including $1.1 billion to tackle crime, support police, and hold criminals accountable. You mean like allowing people to steal up to $900 worth of stuff without being charged in shoplifting? Yeah, that's a good move. I look at what's happening in California. It's just a great disrespect to the taxpayers in the taxpayers' resources in the history of America, the chief financial officer of the state of Florida told Fox News. However, an official from the Department of Finance acknowledged that a 1.6 reduction in the State Department's of Justice overall proposed budget. What's happening in California is just absolutely unbelievable, Jimmy T. Patronis told Fox News Digital, the CFO of the state of Florida. they're looking for money to make up this enormous budget deficit they've got right now. Remember, we had billions of dollars in surplus not too many years ago. And Petronas argued that an exodus from California has helped fuel the budget deficit. The Golden State experienced the largest net loss of one way movers, according to the United Van Line study published earlier this year. And people are leaving California in droves. So much so, I believe it was 2 years ago, might have been three, that we actually lost a seat in Congress because of the shift in population. Moreover, California's green energy policies have caused blue collar businesses to suffer from stagnation and decline, a Chapman University study published in April found. Soaring home prices in California, exacerbated by environmental regulations, are also causing historically middle class people to join the exodus, according to the study. And nonetheless, Newsom proposed shifting money from the general fund, offering $1.7 billion for climate goals, particularly those related to equity programs. Petronas also said California's deficit was partially due to businesses fleeing the state because of high crime. And Newsom's proposal to cut public safety funds will only fuel the vicious cycle, he added. Florida, on the other hand, has had budget surpluses. Ultimately, this vicious cycle, where you've got a weaker prison system, will cause weaker incarceration, which has been kind of the narrative that's been coming out of California now, Petronas said. San Francisco has been kind of like the poster child for businesses fleeing a once prosperous city. Since the beginning of the year, there have been 8,686 thefts in San Francisco, not including 1,962 burglaries, 2,298 motor vehicle thefts, according to the latest available crime stats. This year alone, retailers such as Aldo, J. Crew, Madewell announced they were closing their stores at the San Francisco Center. And this follows the trend of major stores who have fled the Northern California city, leaving malls with major vacancies, according to a report. The North Face and Macy's also closed down at the beginning of 2024, and Zara is expected to follow suit in 2025. And the governor's office pointed to the violent and property crime being down for the first quarter this year when compared to last year. And homeless encampments line the streets in Oakland. The city remains plagued by homelessness as nearby businesses close their doors due to safety concerns. And the $80 million cut from the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation is intended to eliminate 4,600 beds across 13 prisons. Now, you see the strategy? If you eliminate the beds, you eliminate the prisoner who sleeps on them. How do you eliminate them? Well, you release them. And this is the plan. And Newsom also proposed slashing law enforcement training and cutting $4.4 million from county probation departments. I wonder if he ever thought about maybe not paying people from other states to fly here to have an abortion. Maybe he shouldn't be spending money in that way. And as I said, this guy is something else. It's just hard to believe that so many people continue to support him, and that the last recall effort was beaten down rather handily, I sadly must say. But Petronas is also worried about Newsom's future ambitions. I think he would love to be the president one day. He could just lie straight through his teeth like nobody I've ever seen on camera, he said. I would hate to ever see somebody with that type of a deliberate mindset to be in charge of our country's economy. And, there's lots of talk that that's what he's being groomed for the office of the president. And again, we've, had personal conversations here in my home about, you just can't believe that the things the guy says that are so contrary to facts and, whatever particular issue he's addressing. And I think Petronas is right. He'll just stand there, look at the camera, and lie through his teeth. Well, the Associated Press, turning another corner, if you will, says that Putin warns that Russia could provide long-range weapons to others to strike Western targets. President Vladimir Putin warned Wednesday that Russia could provide weapons to other countries to strike targets in response to NATO allies allowing Ukraine to use their arms to attack Russia. Putin also reaffirmed Moscow's readiness to use nuclear weapons if it sees a threat to its sovereignty. The recent actions by the West will further undermine international security and could lead to very serious problems, he said. Now, that would mark their direct involvement in the war. I'm sorry, I skipped a line here. Something that has become extremely rare since Moscow sent troops into Ukraine, which would mark their direct involvement in the war against the Russian Federation. And we reserve the right to act in the same way, Putin said. The United States and Germany recently authorized Ukraine to hit some targets on Russian soil with the long range weapons they are shipping to Kiev. On Wednesday, a Western official and a U.S. senator said Ukraine has used U.S. weapons to strike inside Russia under a newly approved guidance from President Joe Biden that allows American arms to be used for a limited purpose of defending Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city. The official was not authorized to comment publicly due to the sensitivity of the matter and spoke on the condition of anonymity. And Putin claimed that using some Western supplied weapons involves military personnel of those countries controlling the missiles and selecting the targets, and therefore, he said Moscow could take asymmetrical steps elsewhere in the world. The U.S. military said it does not control the missiles it provides to Ukraine or the target selection. Now, again, the wars and rumors of wars heading over this would certainly apply here as we see so much talk going on. We've got China and Taiwan. Here we've got the Ukraine, Russia ongoing situation, threats of a outbreak of all-out war between Israel and Lebanon. Just all over the world, we see these things that we've long been dealing with, to be sure. But again, everything is drawing down to the nation of Israel and it becoming this little tiny country. And as has been pointed out by many over the years, the country's so small, you have to write its name out in the Mediterranean on a world flat map. And it's just incredible that we're seeing what we're seeing. But all these things are working in conjunction with one another as part of the last days scenario. And again, it just makes me scratch my head why anybody would deny the fact that Bible prophecy is happening right before our eyes, or even hint at the fact that, they believe everything was fulfilled in 70 AD. Well, there were no wars and rumors of wars. There were not global earthquakes in diverse places. There wasn't rampant pestilence all over the world. There weren't all these tensions between ethnic groups other than the Romans and the Jews. It just doesn't make any sense. And certainly verses like those in Zechariah chapter 14 and the whole of Zechariah 12 to 14, when did that ever happen? We never saw people's tongues dissolving in their mouths or their eyes melting from their sockets, as Zechariah prophesied. It just doesn't make sense. So if it hasn't happened and there's no historical parallel, that means it is yet to happen. And thank the Lord that he is going to remove us. And again, I make no apology for being grateful for the rapture of the church. And you know what? We have been appointed to tribulation in this life. Jesus said so. In this life, you will suffer tribulation. That word tribulation, the Greek term, can be translated as anguish and anxiety and stresses and all the other things we go through, because that's where we live. We live in a life that is full with pressures and pains and backstabbing and lies and cheats and thefts and all those things are a normal part of our daily experience, and even more so in these last days. But what we will not ever see as the body of Christ is God's wrath. Now, the Jewish News Syndicate reports something. Again, this is a tough story. We've got a couple coming up. And the headline is The Rise of the Protester Terrorist. For Jews the world over, the past 8 months have been a little more than a series of catastrophes. Contrary to their expectations, American Jews have proved to be no exception. They have discovered that no Jewish community is ever immune to history. American Jews are reeling from this terrible realization to an extent. So are all Americans, and with good reason. After all, what has emerged since the October 7th massacre has been rather remarkable. A self-declared anti-racist movement that embraces anti-Semitism, an unholy alliance between a totalitarian theocratic movement and ostensibly secular progressives, imperious institutions of higher education that happily tolerate the most brazen violations of their own codes of conduct, politicians who preach morality while calling for genocide. Above all, the first anti-Semitic mass movement in American history has arisen. There have been anti-Semitic movements in America before, of course, but never have they been this large, politically influential, violent, and explicitly opposed to the fundamental principles of their own society. Like all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are these: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Certainly, many of those participating in this movement are simply ignorant conformists riding a wave of protest and outrage. They likely have little idea of what all the fuss is actually about, but they enjoy the opportunity to vent their anger. Moreover, thanks to a collaborative media, there is a terrible glamour to self-righteous mayhem. It's trendy to hate Israel and the Jews, and sadly, America is a society of trends. The movement is being led, however, by a remarkable character, the protester terrorist. The protester terrorist is not an entirely new phenomenon, contrary to the claims of most historians. American protest movements have always had a violent side. The riot, large or small, has been a constant throughout American history. In a nation founded in a violent revolution, it can hardly be otherwise. And the protester terrorist is quite different from other protesters. Unlike the passive resistor or even the rioter, the protester terrorist does not take to the streets in order to confront an oppressive authority or engage in random acts of violence. Instead, under the guise of activism, the protester terrorist pursues the work of terrorism in another register. He does not set off bombs and buses or slaughter women and children, but his strategy is the same: to use the public display of horrific acts to intimidate others into silence and surrender. This tactic of the propaganda of the deed is not new either, but in today's iteration, it's unlike its predecessors in two ways: its nihilism and its institutionalizationism. Regarding the former, rarely have we seen an ostensible protest movement so brazenly hurl all morality to the winds. Today's protester terrorists are not simply immoral, they are anti moral. Their ethos is a total inversion of ethics. To them, and we know this because they say so, murdering, raping, kidnapping, and torturing innocent people is a good thing. So is racism. So is genocide. So, for all we know, is the destruction of the world. The protester terrorist is not just morally bankrupt, he is satanic. He is morality's adversary. As for institutionalization, it is clear that we are seeing the end game of one of the most successful conspiracies in American history. Half a year ago, having failed to seize power through riot and terrorism, the radicals of the 1960s turned to the infiltration of powerful institutions to transform them into weapons of radical political action. This long march through the institutions was wildly successful. The American university system and the elite in manufacturers are now ruled by a dictatorship of the professorate that employs intellectual and at times physical terrorism to impose its ideology on a nation that does not want it. And again, we have never seen the things, as the article says, that we're now seeing today. And this, again, would play right into the reality that we would expect if it's late in the game, the prophetic game that is, uh, terms like unprecedented or phrases like never seen before or new level. All these things are indications that we indeed should be looking up as our redemption draws nigh, and the redemption of these bodies. The dead in Christ, remember, rising first, and we are alive and remaining, meeting in the air to forever be with the Lord. Paul even talked about the fact of this transition is to be words of comfort in 1 Thessalonians 4. So we need to be comforted by these things. And, I don't take much comfort in thinking, well, we're going to go through the tribulation and God is going to protect us and we're going to see, a good portion, almost half of the world's population destroyed by a couple of events within the tribulation, and one of them beginning under the ride of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And I don't take that to be very comforting. And those who are anti-rapture believers say, that's the typical response. Well, I think it's a pretty good one. We can take comfort that we're not going to see all the things coming upon the world. Now, here's a follow-up story to our last one, and it comes from the City Journal based out of Portland. And the headline reads, "In Portland, the Intifada begins in kindergarten. The local teachers union encourages students," again, kindergarten, "to resist Zionist bullies." Portland, Oregon has earned its reputation as America's most radical city. Its public school system was an early proponent of left wing racialism and has long pushed students toward political activism. As with the death of George Floyd 4 years ago, the eruption of Hamas terrorism in Israel has provided Portland's public school revolutionaries with another cause du jour. Now they've ditched the raised fist of Black Lives Matter and traded it in for the black and white keffiyeh of Palestinian militants. I have obtained a collection of publicly accessible documents produced by the Portland Association of Teachers, an affiliate of the state's teachers union, and it encourages more than 4,500 members to teach Palestine, according to the author of this article. The lesson plans are steeped in radicalism. They begin teaching the principles of decolonization to students as young as 4 and 5 years old. How about ABCs? How about nap time and coloring? How about snacks and playground and recess and all those things? But no, we've got to teach the principles of decolonization to 4 and 5-year-olds. For pre-kindergarten kids, the union promotes a workbook from the Palestinian Feminist Collection, which tells the story of a fictional Palestinian boy named Handala. And when I was only 10 years old, I had to flee my home in Palestine, the boy tells readers. A group of bullies called Zionists wanted our land, so they stole it by force and hurt many people. Students are encouraged to come up with a slogan so they can chant at a protest and complete a maze so that Handala can get back home to Palestine, represented as a map of Israel. Other pre-K resources include a video that repeats left-wing mantras, including "I feel safe where there are no police," and a slideshow that glorifies the Palestinian Intifada or violent resistance against Israel. The recommended resource list also includes a sensory guide for kids on attending protests. It teaches children what they might see, hear, taste, touch, and smell at protests, and promotes photographs of slogans such as "Abolish prisons" and "From the river to the sea." Remember, this is 4 and 5-year-olds who are being taught that. The article goes on to say, in kindergarten through second grade, the ideologies intensify. The Teachers Union recommends a lesson, Art and Action for Palestine, that teaches students that Israel, like America, is an oppressor. The objective is to connect histories of settler colonialism from Palestine to the United States and to celebrate Palestinian culture and resistance throughout history and in the present, with a focus on Palestinian children's resistance. You know, the problem with this is if you go back before 1967, anytime the word Palestinian was used, it was used in a reference to the Jews who lived in what was known as Palestine, since Hadrian in 136 AD renamed the land of Israel, and because of his hatred for the Jews. You know, it's pretty simple to unravel this. So it tells us of the ideology that's behind this and the hatred and anti-Semitism that this is birthed out of, because a few simple questions, excuse me, I got the hiccups all of a sudden. A few simple questions can basically eliminate this, like name a famous prime minister from Palestine from a century ago, or what is their currency, name Palestinian archaeology or architecture rather, what is the style, and none of these things can be answered. Why? Because this is the land of Israel, and there have been Jews present in the land of Israel for some 3,500 years. Even though the diaspora scattered them all over the world, I believe that the number that was never exceeded was less than 10,000 Jews living in this region. And the lesson suggests that teachers should gather the kindergartners in a circle and teach them the history of Palestine. 75 years ago, a lot of decision makers around the world decided to take away Palestinian land to make a country called Israel. Again, just a bold-faced lie. Israel would be a country where rules were mostly fair for Jewish people with white skin. Now, that's just beyond stupid. The Jews are Middle Eastern. They are olive skinned. Some are black. And the lesson reads, there's a big word for when indigenous land gets taken away to make a country. That's called settler colonialism. So they're teaching kindergartners to hate the Jews. And this indoctrination, I think, is just unbelievable. It's another reason I believe that we're running out of time and the Lord is going to go on the offensive on behalf of the nation of Israel. He will fight as he fights in the day of battle against all nations that gather against Jerusalem, which will be literally all nations of the world during the tribulation period. And he is going to destroy them quite handily. But again, the curriculum, a pamphlet curriculum read to elementary age students is called All Out for Palestine. And the pamphlet, explicitly political with a subheadline blaring in all capital letters, Stop the Genocide, End U.S. Aid to Israel, Free Palestine. Now, why in the world do first and second graders need that on their plate? Because they're looking to indoctrinate the next generation to hate Israel more than even this one does. Justice is our demand. No peace on stolen land. We salute our martyrs. Resistance is justified when people are occupied, or the chance that these students are being taught. Lord have mercy. Now, one last story here this evening. And again, thank you for joining us, and so appreciate all who watch continually. And again, as I said, we've got a lot of shadow banning going on of late, and just such a sad state of affairs where people are so afraid of truth that they will limit its ability to spread amongst the people, including this story. The Gateway Pundit says the World Health Organization's Tedros declares it's time to be more aggressive in pushing back on anti-vaxxers. And the parentheses in this headline is, in the same week that media reports connection to excessive deaths created by the jab. And during a talk titled Celebrating 50 Years of Immunization Progress, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, made it clear that no debate is allowed when it comes to vaccines. Ghebreyesus told the audience, the serious challenge that's posed by anti-vaxxers, and I think we need to strategize to really push back. He continued, I think it's time to be more aggressive in pushing back on anti-vaxxers. I think they use COVID as an opportunity, and all the havoc that they are creating. And don't forget that Dr. Tedros has a long history of openly lying to the global community. The Gateway Pundit reported several outrageous and dangerous lies spread by Dr. Tedros during the pandemic, and how dare he accuse anyone of misinformation when he's the king of misinformation. And the World Health Organization said there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission initially, and these are just some of the lies that were initially told. I think that was a bird flu mentioned here. And Tedros, who said the WHO went from the coronavirus being no big deal to projecting massive death from the coronavirus. And this was first reported on March 17, 2020, on the controversial Ethiopian politician and Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, and his irresponsible and criminal fear-mongering. Tedros claimed in a press conference early in March 2020 that the mortality rate for the coronavirus was 3.4%, many multiples of that fatality rate of the common flu, which is estimated to be around 0.1%. This egregiously false information led to the greatest global pandemic in world history. The pundit reported that the coronavirus fatality rate reported by the liberal mainstream media was completely inaccurate, and the actual rate was more like the typical seasonal flu and less than 1%. Again, the media was lying to the public. In July 2020, the numbers were confirmed. The CDC stated that at minimum 20 million Americans have had the coronavirus that have been tested, resulting in the coronavirus mortality rates similar to the flu. And the World Health Organization and Ghebreyesus continue to attack those who have legitimate concerns about vaccinations, and they have ignored data on the dangers of the COVID-19 vaccines. Yet, research by the Food and Drug Administration suggests toddlers and young children are at a significantly elevated risk of seizure after taking on the COVID-19 vaccine. A comprehensive review by an international consortium of scientists has raised serious concerns about the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine safety profile. And the review, and there's a lot of medical terminology here, it asks if the methylpseudoridine is a friend or foe of cancer, published on Science Direct. It delves into the potential implications of a vaccine ingredient, methylpseudoridine, that may play a role in immune suppression and cancer proliferation. And previously reported, there was a recent report published by the American Cancer Society that predicted new cancer cases are expected to reach a new high in 2024, and can also be reported, and also reported the case of Dr. Michael Goldman, a Belgian pro-COVID vaccine doctor and professor at Free University of Brussels, specializing in internal medicine and immunology, where he suggested that the mRNA vaccine might worsen lymphoma cancer. Dr. Robert Redfield, the former director of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, came forward with serious allegations against health agencies, claiming they suppressed information about the significant side effects of COVID-19 vaccines in younger populations. And Dr. Angus Dalgleish, a renowned oncologist practicing in the UK, recently wrote an open letter to the editor-in-chief of the medical journal, the BMJ, urging the journal to make a valid, informed consent for COVID vaccination a priority topic, because cancers and other diseases are rapidly progressing among boosted people. Now, if you took the shot, don't want to put any fear in you. And, a lot of people, I think, especially early on, we didn't know what was going to happen. And you should be able to trust the CDC. But we found out after the fact that, most of the restrictions that were imposed by Fauci were just made up by Fauci. And there wasn't any scientific data to support them. And again, just so many things pointing to the prophetic scenario of lawlessness abounding, love of many growing cold. The tensions and stresses that we see happening in the world tell us our redemption again is nigh. And again, when it speaks of redemption, talking about the redemption of our bodies. If you're a born again Christian, you are completely redeemed. Your soul is saved, and to be absent from the body, you will be present with the Lord. Nothing can change that. You can't lose your salvation. I believe a lot of people are in a grievous error who say that, God bases his love for us on our performance, and that's just simply not true. We're saved by grace through faith. And if he saved us when we were all messed up, he'll keep us even though we mess up after we're saved. So that's good news, I know, for most of us. Well, that's it for this week. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and so appreciate your prayers and support, and your viewership, especially in times such as these, as there's so much stuff being said out there that's a bunch of nonsense. And so we don't, and that's one thing I appreciate about my dear friend and brother Amir Sarfati, is he is anti-sensationalism, as am I. We just want to report the facts and things as they directly relate to Bible prophecy. So again, appreciate you joining us this week. Please keep praying for those that I mentioned at the top of the hour. And anybody that, are on your comments, throw in a prayer request if you have them there. And as I have an opportunity, or others certainly will, I don't always get a chance to see the comments out there. We'll join you in prayer for those you love and care for, want to see come to know Christ as Savior and Lord. Well, that's it for this week. And again, thank you so much, and love and appreciate you all. And you know what's coming. We'll see you here, there, or in the air. God bless.